ROM hacking unofficial modifications of usually console games, that's the topic. Inspired by the sad news that romhacking.net, the biggest, the best ROM hacking news and archive site for the past 20 years is, well, kind of no more. It's going read-only, though it will still continue with news updates, and for the moment you can still download. The archive itself has been uploaded to archive.org, so that isn't going to be lost, but yeah, this is still kind of a blow to the massive ROM hacking scene. I'm not going to get into the whys and wherefores of the shutdown, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about some of the history of ROM hacks, some of my favourites, and some that push the limits. But before I dive into that, it would really help if you could hear me out here when I tell you all about Raid Shadow Legends, and you should stick around for this because there's big news and exciting rewards for new players too. First up, Ninja is back. Who he? Well, players have been begging for this champion to return for years, and you too can get hold of this legendarily strong champion by downloading through my link and entering the code Ninja Returns. Plus, hashtag we finally played it, a special event for new Raid players. Download Raid and head to wefinallyplayedit.plarium.com and upload a video showing how Raid has changed your life for a chance to win some big prizes. But there's always loads going on in Raid, that's kind of what it's about, a constant content conveyor belt, tons more depth than you might realise, plus the graphical style which I really love, and the fact that it's on PC too, that's what keeps me coming back to Raid. Maybe you might want to get drawn in too. You might say it's pay to win, and yeah, you can spend money on this game, but you don't need to enjoy it. Plenty of purely free-to-play followers out there. You might say it's a time grinder, and if that puts you off, well, Raid has features like Auto Battle and Guardian Ring, which can keep you in the game without being in the game, if you see what I mean. So new players, click my link in the description or scan the QR code up there and you can get some amazing in-game loot and an epic Tegoa and Aina when you reach level 25. So hit that link and once you're in, you can find me under the name Chiropolis and we can be legends together. Okay, thanks Raid, let's get on with ROM hacks, and I'm sure you can trace the origins of modifying games all the way back to the beginnings of video games themselves, when they were passed around on punch cards in university computer labs. But these days the term ROM hacks has come to mean a certain type of modification to specifically commercial, nearly always console games. Early Atari 2600 games usually had dozens of built-in variations. Space Invaders boasted 112 video games on its box, really 112 lightly modified versions of Space Invaders. Invisible enemies, moving bases, that kind of stuff. Gameplay changes that do actually look kind of like a primitive version of what ROM hacks became known for. You see, these aren't just cheats we're talking about here, it's not just making the game easier or unlocking stuff that's already in there, but actual modifications to the gameplay in some way. Another common feature of ROM hacks is changes to the graphics as well, and Pepsi Invaders provides an early example of that. Yeah, it's Space Invaders once again, this time reskinned, a special version of the game given out at a 1983 Coca-Cola corporate convention. This was an official product though, done by Atari themselves, and one of the key hallmarks of ROM hacks is that it's done unofficially, without any input or consent from the original creators. Jet Set Willy on the ZX Spectrum must be one of the first proper commercial games to have an unofficial modding scene, and for a while it was pretty big amongst specky enthusiasts. Aided by specially designed modding tools, making altered versions of Jet Set Willy became a bit of a cottage industry, and there were dozens of releases in the 80s and still quite a lot coming out today. One thing though, mods for computer games as opposed to consoles generally get called mods and not ROM hacks. The distinction can sometimes seem totally arbitrary, but without getting bogged down in stupid semantics, ROM hacks generally means console games, typically older ones too, with games that came on ROM cartridges, like maybe the biggest ROM hack platform of them all, the NES. Piracy seems to have been the source of a lot of early NES hacks, usually with duplicitous aims, either to try and hide the source of copyrighted games or to con cartridge buyers into thinking they were getting something new when they weren't. Simple graphic swaps and minor modifications mostly, but Chinese company Yanshan Software seems to have been the first to go a bit further and give consumers something properly new with Tank 1990 in 1990, a reworked version of Famicom game Battle City. They went even further than that in 1993 with Super Contra 2, a whole new remixed game based not on Super Contra but the original Contra. Honestly, it's not brilliant, but I've got to admire their spirit in trying to do something more than just rip off minor adjustments. This and Tank 1990 though would certainly have been distributed on cartridges as complete games, despite the illegality of that. This is something that modern ROM hacks don't do though. They are distributed as patches that you can apply to the original ROM file of a game to sidestep any copyright issues. Something that allowed romhacking.net to exist in the open for so long. It's not the protected original game that's made available, just the modifications. Interestingly, that idea goes back quite a long way, right back to 1987 with the release of probably the first true ROM hack in the modern sense of the word, and honestly, still one of the best somehow, Tonkatchi Mario. Nintendo's Famicom Disk System, released in 1986, brought games on floppy disk to the Japanese NES equivalent, the Famicom, opening up new opportunities to pirate games, yes, but also mess around with them in more benign ways like what the utility program, the Tonkatchi editor, offered. Basically a hex editor that lets users edit data on disks, but in the right hands, well, it could do all sorts of impressive stuff, and that's what this is. Tonkatchi Mario is a demo of what you could do with the Tonkatchi editor, a totally new set of extremely inventive levels based on the disc version of Super Mario Bros. And yes, it was never supplied as a complete game, but a patch you could apply to your own Super Mario Bros. Disc, very much like modern ROM hack patches. A pioneer on that front, and I did make a whole video about that one, so if you would like to hear more, I will link to that below. The modern ROM hacking scene though, ROM hacking as we know it, didn't really get going till the mid to late 90s, helped by two technological developments, emulators and the internet, making it so much easier to both make and distribute patches. The earliest fan-made ROM hacks archived at romhacking.net come from 1996, and if this, Pac-Man New Levels, isn't the oldest one out there, it must be pretty close. A lot of early fan-made ROM hacks were just simple graphical reskins or very minor modifications to stuff that's relatively easy to edit. This though would have required some actual hacking of the Pac-Man game code to make it work. The game's logic must have been updated to load in and run through the new levels instead of just replaying one over and over, an early example of the more sophisticated reprogramming of games that the modern ROM hacking scene has become known for. And yes, if you want NES ROM hacks, your cup will runneth over. There's tons and absolute abundance of them. I'm fond of this Super Mario Bros. Extra, a sort of Metroid-y remix of the original game, but there's also the stunning Super Mario Bros. 3 mix. A new adventure based on Super Mario Bros. 3, featuring levels inspired by, well, not just NES Mario, but later games too. For my money though, the most impressive NES ROM hack, the most limit-pushing one, is Rockman 4 Minus Infinity, based on Rockman 4 or Mega Man 4 in the West, another total reimagining of the game, but one that outdoes the original in every way, including lots of graphical effects. This sort of lighting effect on Brightman stage is pretty much unique on the NES, very clever. It's done by manipulating the little known and even less used colour emphasis registers that the NES PPU chip has, creating a sort of lighter band above and below Rockman with darker shades on the top and bottom. Enemy sprites are also affected, being hidden, disappearing in the darkness, and it's not just a pretty effect but a play mechanic as your band of light gets smaller as you move through the level, making it more difficult. The original game absolutely did not do this. The Super NES is another source of endless ROM hacks, yeah, loads of reworkings of classic games, but also some technological advancements too, like this 60Hz patch for Star Fox. Even the unfussiest of gamers are going to notice that the original is not the smoothest experience, and this version totally fixes that, bringing nice, smooth 60 frames per second visuals to this early 3D spectacular, but not in a totally legit way. You can overclock the super effects that powers this game, either on an emulator or even on the real hardware, but that can only do so much because of memory bandwidth. You can, in an emulator, overclock the entire system to solve that, but then the game runs way too fast to be playable. But that's what this patch does, it tunes the game so it can be played at a sensible speed when overclocked. Sadly, this doesn't and never will work on real hardware. You do need to use an emulator, which can overclock the system in ways that you can't do on a real console. There's also a whole sub-genre of ROM hacks based around the MSU1 chip, a sort of fantasy enhancement chip that gives the Super NES the sort of abilities that the never-released Super NES CD add-on would have offered. And it can actually work on the real hardware if you have a high-end flash card like the FX Pack Pro. Enhanced soundtracks seem to be the most popular use for this thing, usually featuring those orchestral versions of game soundtracks that get made endlessly, and ding, content matches too, that's why you're not hearing anything. I'm not a fan anyway, I'm sorry, I'm not, but I am very much a fan of Casio Mario World. I did think this was an MSU1 hack at first, but it isn't. It's totally enhancement chip free. A Kaizo hack of Super Mario World, and if you're not familiar with that term, it just means a very hard hack that requires a lot of skill and also pretty in-depth knowledge of the game's mechanics. The genre named for a 2007 hack of Super Mario World, though the origins of this sort of thing can probably trace back to the aforementioned Tonkatchi Mario. There is a tutorial level which does make things easier, but I can't even get through that. It's just too hard. But the soundtrack, well, wow, featuring rearranged tracks from electronic artist Tricks Point Never, this has got to be one of my favourite video game soundtracks ever. I don't think this is official use of this music, but it does sound really good, and yeah, you're not hearing it now because content matching. What's all the more incredible is it fits into a megabyte ROM image. Clever use of samples here, definitely. There's also a spiritual sequel called Tired Mario, with more electronic goodness on the soundtrack too, but there's plenty more in the wide world of ROM hacks. You might think this is a Nintendo only thing from what I've shown you so far, but it's not totally, but well, kind of is as well. Sega systems definitely do get a bit of a look in, but ROMhacking.net lists more Virtual Boy ROM hacks than Game Gear ones. Of course, the Game Boy and DS line of consoles is hugely represented. Plenty of Pokemon and also plenty of Castlevania stuff too. Though the Sega Mega Drive does enjoy a fairly decent number of hacks. To be fair, Sonic, yeah, a popular target, and well, Sonic VR is a particularly notable hack, I think. Another absolutely fantastic soundtrack which, again, content matches so you won't hear it here, based on music from chiptune inspired band Anamanaguchi. More heavy sampling stuff, making good use of the Mega Drive's often overlooked capability in that regard. I'm not quite as in love with the music here as Casio Mario, but it is still really good. The gameplay though is much more my line, interesting, inventive, and not nearly so bafflingly difficult. There does seem to be a kind of cut-off point for ROM hacks though. Modern games, even modern console games, tend not to have ROM hacks. It's all a mod or an add-on now, even if they do the same sorts of things. To be fair, all modern games work in a massively different way, and even the still ROM cartridge using Switch has architecture that's a world apart from any classic console. All those Tears of the Kingdom mods are much more like mods for PC games in how they function than old school ROM hacks. Yes, ROM hacks do tend to be retro, and maybe the newest system, aside from the handhelds already mentioned, the newest system that has a ROM hacking scene rather than a mod scene is the N64. It's still kind of an arbitrary distinction, but let's not worry about semantics. This is romhacking.com, not a replacement for romhacking.net, but a site devoted pretty much solely to Super Mario 64 hacks, and there's loads of them. Many that are compatible with the original hardware and many that aren't. Yes, things have become a bit unmoored from that. It definitely does have the best ROM hack of all time ever hosted here. Yeah, that might sound like a very bold claim, you might be skeptical, but let me just introduce you to Shotgun Mario 64. This is what Mario 64 needed all along. It does look like one of Shigeru Miyamoto's literal nightmares, probably. I'm sure he's not actually seen this hack in person, but I do feel like he can sense its existence emotionally on some level. Everyone at Nintendo, I'm sure, is like, see, this is why we're shutting down ROM sites, this is what it leads to, but yeah, it's Mario with a shotgun. Now though, I think it is definitely time to wind this video up. What about translations? That is the other half of romhacking.net. I've not mentioned them so far. Yeah, fan translations of games, usually from Japanese into another language, have been closely associated with the ROM hacking scene for years. But I really do think though that translations deserve their own video, so I will leave that aside for now. But yeah, it is sad to see romhacking.net stripped back a bit, not completely gone, but stripped back. News is still being posted as I make this video, and the forum is still active as well, but its archive, which was such a big deal for the ROM hacking scene, it won't be being updated. Hopefully some alternative will pop up as the main repository for the scene, which is as active as it's ever been, or so it looks like. Lots more ROM hacks to come. In fact, I'm sure they're only getting more sophisticated as time goes on. So anyway, I will say thank you to my Patreons for their wonderful support, and I'll also encourage anyone else who would like to join them to do so. It really does make a big difference. There is a link below. And just before I do go, thanks again to Raid Shadow Legends. Hit that link below or the QR code up above to download Raid and get some amazing in-game loot. And now I will bid you adieu and say thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.